The dinner table was covered in white flowers and expensive candles, and everyone was smiling, and the food smelled wonderful, and I had worn the blue dress my husband once told me made me look like someone worth choosing. I remember thinking that night felt almost perfect. I remember thinking that maybe the last 2 years of trying so hard had finally started to mean something. And then my husband picked up his wine glass, looked across the table at his mother, and laughed. He laughed the way people laugh when they are about to say something they have been wanting to say for a very long time. And what came out of his mouth next was not a joke. It was the clearest truth I had ever heard him speak, and it landed right in the center of my chest like something cold and heavy and permanent. He said he only married me because he felt sorry for me. He said it like it was funny. He said it like I was not sitting 3 feet away. He said it like 4 years of my life meant nothing at all. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something real. If the person who was supposed to love you most said something like that out loud in front of people while you were sitting right there, what would you do? Would you cry? Would you leave the table? Would you stay quiet and survive the night? Think about that while I take you back to where this story actually begins, because what my husband did not know that night was that I had already made a decision. And that decision was about to change everything he thought he owned. My name is Nadia. I am 34 years old, and for most of my adult life, I believed that if I worked hard enough, stayed patient enough, and loved carefully enough, the people closest to me would eventually see it. I believed that loyalty showed up in the long run. I believed that being dependable was its own kind of proof. I am not the kind of person who makes scenes or raises her voice or sends angry messages at 2 in the morning. I am the kind of person who notices everything, remembers everything, and waits. Sometimes I waited too long. That is the honest part of this story. I grew up in a small house in a town that nobody outside of it would recognize by name. My mother worked double shifts at a hospital laundry facility for most of my childhood, and my father did what he could between jobs that came and went like weather. We were not poor in a dramatic way. We were poor in the quiet, invisible way where there is always just enough to survive but never enough to rest. I learned early that the people around me were tired, and so I learned not to add to that tiredness. I cooked when nobody asked me to. I helped with bills when I was old enough to work. I kept my problems to myself because I had watched what happened when problems spilled out in our house. Nothing got solved. Things just got louder and then went silent. By the time I was 22, I had put myself through 2 years of community college, found a job at a small property management office, and was slowly teaching myself everything I could about real estate contracts, property law, and financial documentation. I was not handed anything. Every skill I had came from time I spent staying up late, reading things I did not fully understand yet, asking questions nobody paid me to ask, and showing up the next day anyway. I met Marcus when I was 26. He came into the property management office where I worked to ask about a commercial lease for a small space his family was trying to rent. He was tall, well-dressed, and very comfortable with himself in the way that people are when they have always had a soft place to land. His family was not wealthy in a spectacular way, but they were established. His father had owned a mid-sized construction business for years. His mother, Diane, ran the family like a project, and she was good at it. Everyone in their circle knew who the Calloway family was. They had opinions, and they had connections, and they had a very clear picture of what a Calloway woman was supposed to look like. I was not that picture. Marcus and I started seeing each other quietly. He was charming in a way that felt genuine at first. He asked about my work. He seemed interested in how I had taught myself things. He told me once that he had never met anyone who worked as carefully as I did. I felt seen by that. I felt like someone had finally noticed the part of me that I worked hardest to build. We dated for almost a year before he introduced me to his family, and when he did, I felt the temperature in the room change the moment I walked in. Diane smiled with her mouth. Her sister Patricia looked at my shoes. His brother Joel made a joke I did not understand, but that made everyone else laugh a little too quickly. Marcus squeezed my hand under the table and said nothing. I told myself it was just first meeting nerves. I told myself that every family has an adjustment period. I told myself that what mattered was Cuss and Marcus had chosen to bring me here, and that meant something. I was good at finding reasons to stay patient. It was one of my worst habits dressed up as a virtue. We got engaged after 2 years of dating. Marcus proposed in a way that was sweet and private, just the two of us in the apartment he had started renting near the office where I still worked. There was no big event, no surprise dinner, no family gathering, just a ring on a Tuesday evening and a question that felt sincere enough that I said yes before he finished asking. I was happy. I want to be clear about that. In that moment, I was genuinely happy. The wedding was small because Marcus said he wanted something intimate and because I had no savings left to contribute to anything large. The Calloway family covered most of the expenses, and Diane made sure everyone knew it, not in a cruel way, in a very polished way, the kind of way where the gift is also a chain. At the reception, Diane gave a toast where she talked about how Marcus had always had a generous heart. She said he had always been someone who looked out for people who needed looking out for. She looked at me while she said it. She smiled warmly. I held my champagne glass and smiled back and told myself I was reading too much into it. But I was not reading too much into it, I never was. The first year of marriage was what I would call survivable. Marcus worked in his father's construction company in a managerial role that suited him. He was good with people and good with deals, but he did not like paperwork and he did not like conflict, which meant both of those things quietly became mine. I continued working at the property management office and started taking on after-hours consulting work for small landlords who needed help understanding their contracts and legal obligations. I was building something, slowly, carefully, the way I always did everything. We lived in a medium-sized apartment that Marcus had chosen and that we split the cost of. His family lived 20 minutes away and we saw them often. Every Sunday dinner at Diane's house, every holiday, every birthday, every family gathering that Diane organized with the kind of precision that made it clear attendance was not optional. I went to all of them. I brought dishes and gifts, and I remembered everyone's preferences, and I helped in the kitchen, and I never once complained out loud, because I understood that these events mattered to Marcus, and I had decided that what mattered to Marcus would matter to me. What I did not fully understand yet was that being present at every event did not make me part of the family. Being useful at every event did not make me respected. I was treated like a good staff member, reliable, pleasant, easy to overlook. The comments came slowly at first. Deanne would mention how Marcus's college girlfriend had been studying to become a doctor. Patricia would wonder aloud how I had gone into property management without a 4-year degree. Joel would ask Marcus questions about work in a way that looped around me entirely. Nobody was outwardly cruel. They were perfectly polite in the specific way that lets people feel superior without ever being directly unkind. And every time I mentioned something to Marcus afterward, he would tell me I was being sensitive. He would say his family just needed more time. He would say that I had a habit of looking for problems. So I stopped mentioning it. The second year of marriage brought something I had not planned for. The property management company I worked for began expanding, and the owner, a straightforward woman named Gloria who had built the business herself over 15 years, started pulling me into bigger decisions. I had been with the company long enough and had quietly handled enough difficult contracts that she trusted my judgment. She began teaching me the investment side of property management. She introduced me to her network. She let me sit in on negotiations. And somewhere in that second year, I began to understand that I had a skill that was worth more than I had been treating it. I also started saving, not in a dramatic way, quietly. I opened an account that was separate from our joint account, not because I was planning anything, but because somewhere in the back of my mind I had learned from a lifetime of watching my parents that having nothing of your own was its own kind of danger. I put money aside every month, not a lot at first, but consistently. By year 3, something had shifted in our marriage in a way that was hard to name. Marcus had grown more comfortable in a way that looked like confidence but felt more like distance. He spent more evenings at his family's house without me. He stopped asking about my work. He would answer questions I asked with short replies and then pick up his phone. When I tried to create closeness, he was pleasant but absent. I was not sure if he was unhappy or simply checked out, and when I asked him dire. CTLY one evening, he told me I worried too much. He said everything was fine. He said I had a tendency to create problems where there were none. I believed him, or I tried to, because the alternative was something I was not ready to look at clearly. The third year was also when I made the decision that would turn out to matter most. Gloria came to me with a proposal. She wanted to bring in a trusted partner for a property acquisition project she had been developing for years. She had identified a building in a neighborhood that was quietly changing, a mid-sized mixed-use property that needed renovation and new management. The numbers were strong, the opportunity was real. And she wanted me as her partner because I had done every piece of the groundwork on it. The investment required capital that I did not fully have, but Gloria structured the partnership in a way that allowed my contribution to be phased in over 18 months, and she secured the primary financing herself. I signed that partnership agreement on a Wednesday afternoon with no drama and no announcement. I did not tell Marcus. Not because I was hiding it from him out of malice, but because I had learned that when I shared things that were mine, they became subject to other people's opinions before they had a chance to grow. I had watched Deanne redirect conversations about my work into comments about how Marcus's cousin's wife was doing so well in her field. I had watched Marcus nod along when his family talked about my job as though it were a temporary thing, a placeholder. I was protecting something fragile. So I stayed quiet and I kept working. The property came together over 18 months. Gloria and I hired contractors. I managed the documentation, the legal filings, the tenant applications, the operational structure. I learned things I had never known I was capable of learning. When the building was finally leased out and operating, it was producing real income. My share was real. My name was on real documents. I had built something. And then it was Diane's 65th birthday. The Calloway family planned a large dinner at Diane's home, which had been renovated the previous year with significant help from the construction company Marcus managed. The dining room was beautiful. The tables sat 16. Family had come from 2 states away. There were flowers and catered appetizers and a cake ordered from a bakery in the city. I wore the blue dress. I helped arrange centerpieces before anyone else arrived. I sat next to Marcus at the long end of the table and I listened to 3 hours of family stories and inside jokes and toasts, and I smiled at every appropriate moment because that was what I did. That was what I had always done. Then dessert arrived. Diane was talking about how proud she was of her family, how well everyone had turned out. She went around the table offering kind words for each person. She praised Joel for a new contract he had won. She praised Patricia's son for his grades. She talked about Marcus with a softness that was clear and real, the way a mother talks about a child she has always been certain of. And then she reached the end of her remarks and lifted her glass and said something general and warm about family choosing family. Marcus picked up his own glass. He was relaxed. He had had several drinks. He was grinning in the way he grinned when he was performing for an audience he felt safe in. And then to no one in particular and to everyone at once, he said it. He said that he had always had a generous heart, just like his mother said. He said that was probably why he had married Nadia. He laughed a small laugh. He said she had needed someone stable and he had been raised to be that kind of man. He said he supposed he married her out of pity more than anything else, and wasn't that something? He shook his head like it was a mildly amusing story about himself. Several people at the table laughed, not all of them, but enough. I did not move. I did not look away from my dessert plate. I felt the air in the room rearrange itself around those words. I felt the heat rise in my face and then go very still. I heard someone clear their throat. I heard Deanne say something light and move the conversation forward like a river going around a rock. And I sat there and I breathed and I thought very clearly and very quietly. I thought, I know exactly what I am going to do. I did not cry at the table, I did not leave the room, I did not make a sound. I sat through the rest of that dinner with the same expression I had been wearing all evening. I thanked Diane for having us. I said goodbye to each family member by name. I walked to the car with Marcus, who was chattering about something Joel had said, and I said almost nothing during the drive home. He did not notice. He went to bed. I sat in the kitchen for a long time that night. I did not make a list. I did not send any messages. I just sat and thought with a clarity I had not felt in years, because I had spent 4 years of my life quietly being the woman in the background of someone else's family story, and what Marcus had said at that table was not a drunk mistake or a thoughtless joke. It was the truth as he had always understood it. He had married me out of something other than love. He had told me in the most public and casual way possible that I was a charity project he was proud of, and his family had laughed, and nobody had corrected him. And Diane had moved on to desserts. The next morning, I called Gloria. I did not explain everything. I simply told her I needed to understand every detail of where things stood with our partnership. She walked me through it without asking too many questions because Gloria was the kind of woman who understood when another woman needed information and not explanation. Our partnership agreement was solid. My income from the property was mine alone. My name was on the operating documents. I had been filing my own taxes separately for 3 years. There was no joint exposure. What I had built was mine. Then I called an attorney. Her name was Ruth, and she came highly recommended by a woman in Gloria's network. I made an appointment for the following Monday and I went alone. I brought every document I had. Ruth was thorough and clear, and she did not try to talk me out of anything or into anything. She simply laid out what my situation was. She explained what a separation of assets looked like in our state. She explained what I was entitled to and what I was not. She explained the process clearly and without drama. I left that office with a folder and a next step and a feeling in my body that I recognized from years ago. It was the feeling of deciding to trust myself. I did not confront Marcus that week. I did not send messages to his family. I did not post anything. I went to work every day. I came home. I made dinner twice. I asked about his week. I slept in the same bed. And the whole time, underneath the surface of all of that ordinary routine, I was completing a process that was careful and measured and clean. 14 days after that birthday dinner, I asked Marcus to sit down with me. It was a Sunday. He had just come in from his mother's. He was in a good mood. He sat on the couch and looked at me with the mild attention he usually gave me when I wanted to talk. I told him I wanted to separate. The good mood left his face quickly. He asked me what I was talking about. I told him I had thought about it carefully and I had spoken with an attorney and I wanted to begin the process of separating our lives legally. I told him I was not angry. I told him I was not making this decision in a moment of emotion. I told him I had made it clearly with a full understanding of what it meant and that I wanted to be respectful and direct with him. He asked if this was about the dinner. I said it was not only about the dinner. I said the dinner was simply the moment I heard out loud what I had been trying not to see for a long time. He told me I was being dramatic. He told me it was just a joke. He told me I always did this, found something to be heard about. He told me his family loved me. I waited until he finished. Then I told him that I had retained an attorney and that she would be in contact with his attorney and that I hoped we could handle everything respectfully. I stood up. I went to the kitchen. I made myself tea. He sat on that couch for a very long time. The call started within 48 hours. First from Marcus, increasingly urgent. Then from Diane, Diane's call came on a Tuesday evening and she was warm and measured and she said she hoped I was not making any rash decisions over a misunderstanding. She said Marcus had a wonderful sense of humor and sometimes it did not land the way he intended. She said family was family and these things happened. I thanked her for calling. I told her I understood her concern. I told her my decision was not made in haste. She pushed a little further and said that Marcus had mentioned I had some kind of business partnership she had not been aware of. She said it gently, like it was just information, but I knew what it was. It was the beginning of an attempt to make me feel like I owed explanations. I told Diane that my professional life was my own, that I had always managed it that way, and that I hoped she had a good evening. And I ended the call. Then Joel called. Joel told me I was making a huge mistake. He told me Marcus was a good man. He told me I did not understand how well I had it. He said some things that were not kind and that I am not going to repeat here because they do not deserve any more space than they already took. I listened. Then I told him I would not be continuing this conversation and I blocked his number. Patricia sent a message through a family group chat that I had not left yet. She wrote something about loyalty and about how a real wife stands by her husband during confuse. In times, several family members agreed with reactions and short replies. I read every message. I did not respond. I left the chat. And then the story shifted because word got around. The way word always gets around in families like the Calloways, where reputation and appearances are managed like a shared asset. It got around that Nadia was leaving Marcus. It got around that Nadia had a business partnership nobody had known about. And somewhere in that spreading of information, the tone from the Calloway side began to change in a very specific direction. The calls moved from trying to talk me out of leaving to trying to understand exactly what the financial situation was. Marcus's attorney made contact with Ruth within the week. The correspondence was polite and professional, but what came through clearly was that Marcus's side wanted information about the property partnership and whether it had been created during the marriage and what its current value was. Ruth walked me through the legal reality with her usual calm. She explained what was marital and what was separate. She pointed to the dates. She pointed to the source of the capital. She pointed to the documentation. The partnership predated certain decisions. The funding had come from my personal savings account that predated the marriage account structure. The paper trail was clean. I had not been careless. This did not stop Marcus's attorney from trying. There were several back-and-forth communications that Ruth handled without involving my emotions. There was a period of approximately 3 weeks where I received indirect pressure through various channels. Deanne called once more and said she hoped I understood that a family works together and that Marcus had sacrificed things too during the marriage. I asked her what he had sacrificed. There was a pause. She said that was not the point. I said respectfully that it seemed relevant. She said goodbye and I did not hear from her again. During those weeks I kept showing up at work. I kept managing the property with Gloria. I kept filing my documentation, responding to tenants, reviewing contracts. The work asked nothing of me except attention and competence, and I gave it both gladly. It was the steadiest thing in my life during a period that could have felt very unsteady. Marcus came to the apartment one evening unannounced. He stood in the doorway and he did not look well. He had not been sleeping in a way that showed on his face. He asked me if we could talk. I let him in. I did not sit close to him. I sat in the chair across from where he sat on the couch and I looked at him directly and I waited. He said he was sorry. He said he had not meant what he said the way it came out. He said he had been drinking and showing off for his family, and he said things he did not actually believe. He said I was not a charity case. He said I had never been that. He said he had been foolish and he asked me to reconsider. I listened to everything he said, and I believed that some of it was true. I believed that he was sorry in the way people are sorry when the consequence of something arrives and feels larger than they expected. I believed he had probably not planned that moment at the table. I believed he was genuinely uncomfortable with where things were now, but I also believed something else. I believed that a person who had seen me clearly, who had truly respected what I was, would not have said what he said in that room in front of those people even on his worst evening. You do not accidentally tell 14 family members that your wife is a pity project. That thought does not come from nowhere. It comes from a quiet place that has been thinking it for a long time and finally found a safe enough audience to say it to. I told Marcus I heard him. I told him I believed he felt bad. I told him that was not the same as the thing being fixable. I told him that I had spent 4 years being a very good wife to someone who had spent 4 years looking at me like I was something he had done out of kindness and that I could not rebuild from that. I told him the life I had built for myself was going to continue. I told him I hoped he built something honest for himself too. I told him he needed to go. He left. He did not argue. I think somewhere in him he understood that this version of Nadia was not the one who would be talked out of it. The legal process took several months. It was not dramatic. Ruth was excellent. The property partnership was confirmed as my separate asset. The joint accounts were divided fairly. The apartment lease was transferred to Marcus since his name had been primary. I found a smaller place that was fully mine. I signed that lease on a morning that felt like breathing for the first time in a long time. There is a part of this story that I need to tell you about because it happened about 2 months after the separation was finalized, and it matters. A man named Daniel came into the picture and, not romantically, at least not at first. Daniel was a commercial real estate developer who had become aware of the building Gloria and I managed through a colleague in his network. He reached out to Gloria to ask about the property, whether we had any interest in a joint venture for expansion in the same neighborhood. Gloria brought me in immediately because I was the one who knew that block, that building, those numbers. Daniel and I met over coffee and talked for 2 hours about the market and the opportunity and the structure. He was smart and he was direct, and at no point did he treat what I knew as less than what it was. He asked for my opinion on things and then actually waited for the answer. He challenged ideas I brought up in a way that was intellectually honest, not dismissive. And when the meeting ended, he told Gloria that he wanted to make sure I was centrally involved in any deal that moved forward because I clearly knew the property better than anyone. I drove home from that meeting and sat in my new apartment for a while. It was a very quiet feeling, not excitement exactly, more like recognition. Recognition of what it felt like to be treated as someone who had earned the room they were in. Gloria and I moved forward with Daniel's joint venture. I ran point on the documentation and the financial modeling. Daniel ran point on the development financing and the contractor network. 3 months later, we signed agreements that would double the income the property was generating within 2 years. My stake increased as part of the deal. My name was on a new set of documents. I am not telling you this to make the story feel like a fairy tale because it is not a fairy tale. Business success does not erase years of being overlooked. Income does not undo the feeling of sitting at a table while your husband tells people you were his act of charity. The professional wins were real, but they happened inside a woman who still had to work through the quieter parts of what 4 years had cost her. There were evenings that were hard. There were mornings when I woke up and the apartment was very silent, and I had to remind myself that silence was what I had chosen and that it was better than noise that disrespected me. There were moments when I questioned whether I had stayed too long or left too fast or handled things the right way. But then I would sit down at my desk and look at the documents with my name on them, and I would remember that every single one of those documents was the result of years of quiet work, not luck, not a generous man deciding to give me a chance out of pity. Work, my work. The kind that nobody watched me do because I did it before anyone else was paying attention. The Calloway family went quiet for a while after everything was finalized. Marcus moved into a place near his parents. Diane apparently hosted a dinner where she told family members that the separation had been mutual and that Nadia had always been a private person and these things sometimes did not work out. I heard this through someone tangential to their circle who felt I should know. I was not angry. I actually found it almost amusing. Diane had spent years managing the image of her family like a public project, and here she was, managing mine too, right up until the end. Several months later, Joel contacted me. He sent a message through a mutual contact, not directly because I had blocked his number. The message asked if I would be willing to speak with Marcus about a possible business consultation. It turned out that the Calloway construction company had lost a significant contract and was looking at a property investment opportunity, and someone had mentioned to someone that I had been involved in successful property work. I read that message twice. I sat with it for a moment, and then I replied through the same mutual contact with 3 simple sentences. I told them I did not take consultations from family contacts. I told them I was focused on my current partnerships. I wished the Calloway family well. And I meant that last part not sarcastically. I genuinely wished them well. Staying angry at people who had already taken enough of my time and energy felt like bad math. But I also understood clearly that the version of Nadia who would have rushed to help, who would have seen their need as her opportunity to finally prove her value, that version of Nadia was gone. She had left when Marcus laughed at that birthday dinner and nobody at that table said stop. I want to talk about the night of the dinner one more time because there is a detail I did not mention earlier. When Marcus said what he said, I was not the only one at that table who did not laugh. Across from me at the far end was an older aunt of Marcus's named Helen. I did not know Helen very well. She came to gatherings occasionally from out of state and she was always polite but reserved. When Marcus said what he said, Helen put down her fork. She looked at him, then she looked at me. Our eyes met for just a moment. She did not smile or nod or make a face. She simply looked at me in a way that said she saw what had just happened. Then she looked back at her plate. A week after I had filed with Ruth, Helen sent me a card in the mail. It was a plain card, nothing sentimental on the outside. Inside, she had written in very neat handwriting, "Some decisions only look brave from the outside. I suspect you know how long this one took from the inside. Good luck to you, Nadia." That was all. I kept that card. I still have it. It matters because the story of being overlooked or dismissed in a family like that one is not always the story of one dramatic villain. It is more often the story of a room full of people who have decided not to notice something, and occasionally one person who notices and says so, even quietly, even just once, in a card that arrives in the mail after the decision has already been made. Helen's card did not change anything practical, but it confirmed something. It confirmed that what happened at that table had been visible, it had not been invisible. The people who laughed had chosen to laugh, the people who stayed quiet had chosen quiet, and the person who put down her fork and looked me in the eye had chosen that. Every single person in that room had made a choice, and now I was making mine. That was almost a year ago now. The property is doing well. The joint venture with Daniel is moving into a second phase. I have brought on 2 part-time staff members to help manage the growing administrative side of things. I still work with Gloria, who has become something closer to a mentor and friend than a business partner, though she is both. I have a life that is smaller in some ways than what I thought I was building with Marcus, and larger in every way that turns out to matter. I think about what I would tell a younger version of myself, the 26-year-old who walked into that office and met a charming man with a comfortable family and thought that being chosen by someone established meant she had finally arrived somewhere. I would tell her that being chosen is not the same as being valued. I would tell her that someone making room for you in their life is not the same as them seeing what you bring to it. I would tell her that staying patient is a beautiful quality when the thing you're being patient for is real, and a slow erosion when it is not. I would tell her that the documents with her name on them matter, that the account she built quietly matters, that the skills she taught herself at midnight matter, that all of it matters even when nobody in the room is watching. The dinner table at Diane's house that night is a clear image in my memory. The white flowers, the candles, the wine glasses, Marcus laughing, and me sitting there in the blue dress, already knowing more about what I had built than anyone at that table would have thought to ask about. That is the thing about being underestimated for a long time. People stop checking. They assume the picture they decided you were is still accurate. They stop looking, and you keep working. And what gets built in the space where nobody is looking is often the most solid thing in the whole story. Marcus called me once more about 6 months after everything was finalized. He called late on a weekday evening. I almost did not pick up. When I did, his voice was quieter than I was used to from him. He did not ask for anything. He said he had been thinking about things. He said he was sorry for the dinner, not the general defensive sorry from the visit to the apartment, a different kind of sorry, the kind that comes out slower and feels like it cost something. He said he did not actually believe what he had said. He said he thought I was one of the most capable people he had ever known. He said he thought he had felt intimidated without knowing how to name it, and that it had come out wrong, very wrong, in that room that night. I listened. I did not fill the silence after he finished. I let it sit for a moment, and then I told him I appreciated him saying that. I told him it meant something that he had called. I told him I hoped he was doing okay, and I told him that what was done, and that I was at peace with it, and that I hoped he would get there too. We said goodbye. That was the last time we spoke. I sat with the phone in my hand for a while after that call, not because I wanted to go back, I did not, but because closure has a texture to it that is different from victory, and I wanted to feel it clearly. What Marcus gave me on that phone call was not forgiveness exactly, though I had already stopped waiting for it. It was more like the last piece of information that confirmed I had read the situation correctly. He knew what I was, he had always known. He had just been more comfortable with a version of me that did not know her own worths. And the moment I stopped helping him maintain that version, everything became clear. I know who I am now in a way that is different from how I knew it before. Not louder, not more defended, just more grounded. The way a building is grounded, not because it is rigid, but because the foundation was built right, slowly, without shortcuts, even when nobody was paying attention. My name is Nadia. I built a life. I protected it when I had to. And when the moment came that made the truth undeniable, I did not scream, and I did not beg, and I did not negotiate away what I had earned. I simply stood on what was already mine, and that, it turns out, was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. There is one more thing I want to say, and I want to say it plainly because it is the part that matters most to me now. For a long time, I thought the goal was to be accepted by the people who had already decided what I was. I thought if I was patient enough and helpful enough and careful enough, eventually the Calloways would look at me and see what I actually was. I kept adjusting myself, kept showing up, kept being useful, kept hoping the next gathering or the next season or the next year would be the one where I finally fit. And what I know now is that the problem was never my fit. The problem was that I was trying to fit into a frame that had been built without any space for me in it. No amount of patience or casseroles or birthday cards or folded table napkins was going to change the shape of that frame. The only thing that changed anything was stepping out of it entirely. When I stepped out, I could see the frame for what it was, small, fixed, held in place by people who needed it to stay exactly that size, and I could see myself for what I was too, bigger than the frame, not in an arrogant way, in a factual way. I had built things, I had learned things, I had earned things. I had done it all while holding my tongue and helping at every dinner and showing up to every Sunday gathering and smiling when I did not feel like smiling. The frame never changed, but I did. And eventually, the space between who I was and what the frame allowed became too large to pretend was not there. Marcus's words at that birthday dinner were not the cause of my leaving. They were the last piece of evidence in a case I had been building for 4 years. The decision to leave was not made at that dinner table. It was made long before, in all the small, quiet moments when I noticed something and chose to stay patient and told myself I was reading too much into it. The dinner was just the moment when I stopped telling myself that. I do not hate Marcus, I do not hate Diane or Joel or Patricia. I am not carrying what happened like a wound I need to nurse. I carried it for a while, I put it down. I am not the woman who sat quietly at that table anymore. I am the woman who sat quietly until she was ready and then moved clearly and without drama and with all of her paperwork in order. And I think that is the part that surprised everyone most, not that I left. But that when I left, everything was already arranged. Not because I am cold, because I am careful, because I always have been. That is the thing nobody at that table understood. I had been careful for 4 years, not for them, for myself. And that is where I will leave it. This is Nadia's story. It is not finished because I am not finished. But this chapter is. And if there is someone listening to this who has been sitting quietly at someone else's table, adjusting yourself, staying useful, waiting for the frame to grow big enough to fit you in it, I want to tell you something. The frame does not grow, you do. And the sooner you stop waiting for permission to stand up and take the space your own life has earned you, the sooner you will understand what I now know very well. You were never the one who needed to change. If you have ever sat in a room where your own worth was being quietly misunderstood, or worked harder than anyone around you noticed, or stayed patient long past the point where patience made sense, then you know exactly what kind of weight Nadia was carrying before she finally put it down. I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell me, at what moment in this story did you realize that Nadia had already made her decision? Because I think the moment you identify says a lot about what you yourself have been through. And if this story reached you the way I hope it did, make sure you are here for what comes next, because Nadia is not done and neither is this channel.